Welcome to the regular roundup of the news from A Force for Good. My name's Alistair McConnachie. It's Party Conference season 2016. In the show today, will Nicola Sturgeon announce a second referendum when she addresses her party conference on Saturday the 15th of October? And why the British government has a perfect right and an absolute duty to refuse a second referendum. But before we get to that, we want to look at a couple of newspapers which commented on Theresa May's speech to her party conference last week. And we want to compare and contrast. First up, what some people would regard as perhaps the most left-wing British newspaper, by British I mean sold throughout the United Kingdom, and that's The Guardian. They asked three of their regular journalists and experts to comment on what they thought of her speech. Jonathan Freedland stated, quote, "More interesting though were the long passages that could have come out of the mouth of the last Labour leader. May offered a vision that was a radical break from Thatcherism. Polly Toynbee stated that it was, quote, a homily on morality, social justice and fairness that could have come from Labour, bar the anti-immigration riffs. And Anne McElvoy said that the listeners were, quote, tilted headlong into an old Labour speech, complete with workers' rights and protection for those at the sharper end of capitalism's elbows." That's coming from the 6th of October edition. The editorial that same day stated, quote, "This was not the speech of a liberal, either in economics or in social policy, but it was the speech of someone who thinks government can do genuine economic and social good. It was a speech of ambitious claims, some of them nasty but many not, which, if she turns the words into deeds, may possibly reset the dials of British politics." And it went on to say, "But it was not all a lurch to the right, and Mrs May's opponents should recognise the ambition of what she is doing." So fairly measured words there, coming from The Guardian's point of view. So how did that go down? How did that speech go down with The National, which is the daily separatist manual coming out of the Herald stable here in Glasgow? Well, its front page just said, "Disgusting xenophobic repellent. Why we want nothing to do with Theresa May's ugly vision." So nothing measured there at all. Really just a sort of hysterical headline, which is playing up two things: Scottish exceptionalism and virtue signalling. By Scottish exceptionalism, we mean the notion that people in Scotland are somehow different politically and morally from people in the rest of the United Kingdom, and indeed are so distinct that there can be no true social union between them. Something which is entirely false, because people in Scotland are as left-wing, as centrist and as right-wing as people in anywhere else in the British Isles. And by virtue signalling, we mean pretending to be more moral than thou for political gain. Adopting what one imagines to be the moral high ground so that you can use that vantage point in a deliberate political attack against other people in order to make them feel morally inferior. Scottish exceptionalism and virtue signalling, perhaps the only two things that Scottish separatism has left in the absence of any rationally based political doctrines. So into this highly excitable bout of Scottish nationalist virtue signalling and Scottish exceptionalist posturing blundered the Honourable Member of Parliament for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, the SNP's Mary Black, and she wrote an article in the National on Saturday the 8th of October entitled "We must learn lessons from history and speak out against the Tories' ugly xenophobia." And it's caused a little bit of controversy because she stated here when she said, "I am not exaggerating when I say that the policies being brought forward are reminiscent of early 1930s Nazi Germany." Well, actually, Mary, you are exaggerating. But I'm not going to comment on that because enough people have done so. What, for me, really jumped out of the page is when I read the following. She is reflecting here and lamenting upon Britain's descent into the politics of 1930s Germany, and she states, quote, "All I can think of is an extract I was taught at primary school when I was learning about World War II. Apologies that I cannot remember who the quote is attributed to." Taught at primary school. Okay, here's the quote. "I sometimes fear that people think that fascism arrives in fancy dress worn by grotesques and monsters as played out in endless reruns of the Nazis. Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honour, make you feel proud, protect your house, give you a job, clean up the neighbourhood, remind you of how great you once were, clear out the venal and the corrupt, remove anything you feel is unlike you, ... close quote. And I read that and I thought, she was taught that at primary school? What primary school did she go to? Chairman Mao's primary school for the Revolutionary Youth Vanguard of Paisley? The only quote I can remember verbatim from primary school is, "Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water." So I'm thinking, that's weird. To remember, to be taught that at primary school, to remember it verbatim, but not to remember who wrote it. So I decided to do some research on that quote through the highly technical method of inserting the first sentence into Google. And within 1 minute, I had come up with a very interesting answer. That is actually a poem in prose which was written by the children's book writer and poet Michael Rosen, and it was first published on his Facebook page on the 23rd of April 2014. It was also published a few days later on his blog site on the 18th of May 2014. That's 2.5 years ago. The quote that Mary Black remembers being taught at primary school. Now, you know, people say Mary Black is the youngest MP that we've had for a very long time. Well, if she was taught that at primary school 2.5 years ago, that girl's even younger than we think she is. So it's the SNP annual conference coming up this week, and Nicola Sturgeon will be addressing the faithful on Saturday the 15th of October. The question is, will she ask for a second referendum? Now, we choose our words very carefully there. We say ask for. We do not use the language of the Scottish and British media, which always speaks about Nicola Sturgeon calling a second referendum. Nicola Sturgeon has no right, no legal right to call a second referendum, and our media and our pro-UK politicians should not be using the sort of language which might suggest that she has that right. She cannot call a second referendum. The best that she can do is ask for one. And if she does ask for one, then there is no doubt she should be told she's not getting one. The reason for that is that Britain is not a federal state. The parts of Britain on their own do not have the unilateral right to call referendums. The only institution that can give the go-ahead is the British Parliament. That's because the British Parliament represents everybody in the United Kingdom who has a stake in the United Kingdom continuing. Scotland can't say, we're going to have a referendum to destroy the United Kingdom, when there are people in England, Northern Ireland and Wales who want the United Kingdom to be together and for whom the United Kingdom is their country. They have a stake in this as well, and their stake is represented through the collective British Parliament, and it is for our MPs acting in that collective British Parliament to make the final decision as to whether or not the United Kingdom is going to potentially be destroyed. That's not a decision for Scotland alone to make. This is a point that really needs to be emphasised because it is absolutely crucial to the debate. Perhaps one of the reasons that it's not being properly emphasised up here is because there are elements of the media which support the Scottish nationalist agenda, and among our pro-UK politicians there are far too many of them who are confused on this issue. The Conservative Party and the Labour Party have federalists within their ranks, people who think that we should destroy the British unitary state and we should turn Britain into some kind of loose association of separate and largely autonomous nation states on their own. Well, if we went down the federal route, as we never tire of saying, it would be very easy for Scotland and for Nicola Sturgeon in particular to call for another referendum. She would have a legal right to do that if we were a federal state. What's stopping her from doing it is that we're not a federal state. We are a unitary nation state. The best that she can do is ask for one. And the British Parliament, acting on behalf of everybody else in the United Kingdom who has a stake in the future of the United Kingdom and who wants the United Kingdom to continue to exist, acting on their behalf, and these people are found throughout the United Kingdom and especially in Scotland, acting on our behalf, the British Parliament must say, no, you're not getting a second referendum. Now, we can understand some people saying, oh, you mustn't do that because if the British Parliament were seen to be standing up to the Scottish nationalists, or that would be seen as standing up against Scotland, and there are too many people in Scotland who would essentially get the hump about that, and it would backfire. We can understand that argument. There's a certain amount of truth in that, particularly since organisations such as STV or the Herald stable of newspapers or the Daily Record would certainly make a big Scottish nationalist fuss about that. However, we also have to remember that there are lots and lots of people in Scotland, a majority of people in Scotland, who want the United Kingdom together and will be so grateful for the British Parliament refusing a second referendum, even though the media outlets which I've just mentioned don't really speak for us on that matter. So there is a lot of support in Scotland for the British Parliament refusing a second referendum. There's a lot of support for somebody that's going to stand up and prevent us unionists being essentially thrown to the wolves. Now, some people will be listening to that and they'll be thinking, well, what happened last time? Didn't Alex Salmond call a referendum? No. What happened last time was that the SNP were elected overwhelmingly in Holyrood, and it was David Cameron who offered Alex Salmond a referendum, and who consequently passed the powers to hold one to Alex Salmond. It was David Cameron arguably acting unconstitutionally because he did not get the support of the British Parliament to do so, but it was David Cameron who initiated that referendum. It was not Alex Salmond who initiated it, just as it cannot be Nicola Sturgeon who initiates a second referendum. The motive force, the initiation, has to come from the British Parliament. The best that Nicola Sturgeon can do is ask for one. Now you may say, can she put forward a bill and pass it in the Holyrood Parliament as an act, and then wave that act in the British Parliament's face and say, the Scottish people through Holyrood have spoken? No, she can't do that. It would be illegal for her to put forward a bill. Now we're going to put up a graphic there which aForceForGood designed recently, where we state where in the Scotland Act 2012 these points are made. The first point is that the union is a reserved matter. It's not for Holyrood to pass any bill which relates to the constitutional position of the union. If such a bill is presented to Holyrood, then the presiding officer has a duty to refuse to allow it to continue. And if somehow he allowed it to continue and it was eventually passed as an act, then the Supreme Court would get involved and would surely say that it was unconstitutional and illegal, and would advise the Queen not to sign such an illegal act. So Holyrood cannot pass an act for another referendum. And again, we should be hearing our pro-UK politicians pointing this out, so that they change the frame. They change the frame from this idea that the SNP has the power to call a second referendum, that they change the frame from the idea of Britain being a loose association of nations where Scotland is meant to be able to go off and do its own thing. It's not. It's part of a unitary nation state, thank goodness, and long may it remain so. And so long as it remains part of a unitary nation state, then it is the British Parliament acting on behalf of us all throughout these islands which has the ultimate authority. I want to talk briefly now, in the couple of minutes which we have left, about what we are doing here at aForceForGood. At the weekend, we interviewed a colleague of ours from Canada, and we spoke about Quebec separatism and the lessons that we can learn from that. Now, we're going to release that video as a two-part video over the next couple of weeks, in addition to the regular work that we do. However, something that we've come up against while we've been doing this is that we are realizing that our computer is not powerful enough to handle the volume of video which we are creating, and it's not powerful enough to edit that video as quickly as we need it to be edited if we are to turn it around for the schedule which we have got planned. So we've taken some expert advice on this, and the consensus is that we need to purchase a new computer which we can dedicate entirely to video processing and editing. Now, that's going to cost us around £1,000. We know there are people watching this video who have got that kind of money and who want to put it into the pro-UK movement. Now, if you are one of these people that are watching, please use this opportunity to help us move forward. You can find the donation details in the Show More box directly below this video. And regardless of how large or small the donation that you make, please know that it is valued. It helps us to know that our work is appreciated. So thank you. Please also subscribe using the red subscribe button on the left of the video, and please like this video by clicking on the thumbs up link to the right of this video. This has been a Force for Good production. My name is Alistair McConnachie. Thank you for watching.